Terra Herald of Hope is the face commander for the Mardu Final Fantasy Precon, and if you're intrigued by Terra and interested in what we can do if we turn up the power level just a little bit, then I have some great news for you because that is exactly what we're going to be doing today. This is an optimized build. It has no relation to the Precon, and price was a minor consideration, but it's not going to be a primary factor holding us back. This deck can assemble a lethal board state by about turn 7, but more consistently assembles it by about turns 8 or 9, and is tuned for a mid-bracket level 3. Of course, my name is Nathan, you're watching yet another Salted Productions deck tech. If you enjoyed this video, leave a like on it, I always appreciate it. If you want to see more of this type of video, subscribe, and if you want to support me and my channel, you can check out my Patreon linked down below. As well, I will have a Goldfishing Companion video that will come out a couple of days after this video is published, where you can see in a playtesting environment how the deck plays, how it performs, the sort of general sequencing and decision making that you need to know to play the deck. So make sure to check out that as well. If we look into the price of the deck, this amount of power will cost us around $450. However, there are some caveats. If we were to cut the top 5 most expensive cards and replace them with budget alternatives, that will cut around $185 off of the deck, leaving us with a deck cost of around $265. I was pretty conscious of the cost within the mana base, and I will say for you folks that are new to Magic, investing in your mana bases is a very wise thing to do, but if you want to build this deck, I highly recommend all my followers just proxy up a deck first, just play test it before you decide that you like it, if this is going to be a large investment for you. Now let's read the Herald of Hope really quickly. Terra is a 3/3 for 3. Human Wizard Warrior. At the beginning of combat on your turn, mill 2 cards and she'll gain flying. And then whenever she deals combat damage, we have the opportunity to pay 2 to reanimate a creature with power 3 or less from our graveyard to the battlefield tapped. The power 3 or less stipulation leads to some really interesting brew space. And one thing that I noticed in the stock Precon when I was looking at the list was that it had very few creatures with power 3 or less. And I wanted to absolutely max out the number of creatures in the deck that could be reanimated from Terra. This deck is heavily built around Terra, and we have a lot of protection spells to keep her on the battlefield as a result of that. We want to be activating that deals combat damage trigger as many times as we can and paying for it every single time. So what that means is we actually ended up leaning heavier into the human tribal subtheme, and that's because that unlocks some really powerful synergy cards that benefit from either humans or legendaries. We have awesome cards such as Angel of Glory's Rise, which will reanimate all of our humans from the graveyard to the battlefield. Old Greymon himself, which I will say is rather expensive, the most expensive card in the deck, in fact, at around $53, but he is going to be an awesome lifelink buff with the +2/+2 there. Jarina, a similar effect, but only +2/+0 for our humans. Aomer cares about the number of humans we control as well, although he is more of a generic removal spell in my opinion. And then Bayek of Siwa makes an appearance in this list as the poster boy for the Legendary Matters sub-theme, which we are also running Arvad the Cursed to buff our legendary creatures as well. I was very particular in building the deck to include a lot of removal as well. This is going to be a very removal heavy deck to get those threats off of the board. And as a result, let's jump into the strengths of the deck, which is it is able to very consistently make land drops because we are often discarding and drawing, meaning that we are discarding all of our non-lands into the graveyard. We always want lands in our hand, and so we are always going to be holding on to sources of mana, making the deck very consistent and will never really leave you stranded on lands. It is also resilient to removal by nature because this is a Reanimator deck, so we can always make use of creatures that are destroyed or wiped from the battlefield. Also, we do pack a lot of protection for Terra herself to make sure that she stays on the battlefield. And the deck is very toolboxy, which means that you can always feel like you have the solution to some problem on the board, either in your hand or on the graveyard, because when we reanimate a creature out of our graveyard, we sort of treat it like a second hand, giving us a lot of card selection. And as always, we are entwining a lot of soft synergy in the deck, leaning into humans, leaning into legends to buff up our key cards. The deck does have some weaknesses though, and first of all, I will say that if the deck doesn't hit its combat buffs, or you happen to mill over an important combat buff piece to actually close out the game, the deck can feel like it is dirtling a little bit. In addition, those combat buffs themselves are static effects and not really one-time alpha swing effects like a Crater of Behemoth. So the deck is very grindy in that you're able to consistently remove your opponent's threats, but we don't have a lot of insta-win Alpha Strike possibility here. So it's going to be a very obvious lethal board state that we have on board, which then we can swing at our opponents. But we're leveraging key pieces like Arvad or a Chroma's Will, Goring Ceratops for some double strike, instead of a literally like plus 100 power on board with something like a Critter Hoof Behemoth that you might find in green. And really quick, wanted to mention the mana cost of the deck is 3.37 without Terra on the battlefield. But what's really interesting, I actually put in a bunch of custom mana costs within Mox Field. And with Terra on the battlefield, if we assume that our big creature bodies are only going to cost 2 mana, the curve actually decreases to 2.4 if we assume that all of those creatures cost us 2 mana. So there we can sort of mathematically see the benefit to having Terra on the battlefield, and it really makes the deck hum when she's able to consistently get in combat damage. So let's talk about some cards, starting with the big splashy effects within the deck, our monsters category. So we talked about him already a little bit, but Greymond is a 3-power creature that will give humans we control +2/+2, and most of the time I think we will choose either lifelink and vigilance, or first strike and lifelink, depending on if we have a double strike enabler on board. And the reason why I say that is because we are running a lot of effects that give double strike, like Blade Historian. Attacking creatures you control have double strike, and look at that, it is a human with power less than 3. So what we're going to be doing is trying to get as many trigger procs from Terra as possible by either dealing damage twice, enabling extra combats, or just doubling her trigger straight up. So Odric is in here to give our entire board double strike and flying, and as a reminder, because this is a triggered ability, it will go on the stack with Terra's trigger, and you can choose the order of those triggers. So Terra will gain flying first, which is what you want to stack on top, and then Odric's will trigger after that, so that all of your creatures get flying. Blade Historian, of course, gives our attacking creatures double strike, Greymond +2/+2, Jarina Kudrow +2/+0, and will incidentally make us some tokens here. Martin Stromgald is the closest thing we have to Great Hoof in the deck, because when it attacks, other attacking creatures get +1/+0 until end of turn for each attacking creature other than him, and when he blocks, it does the same thing, but we typically won't be blocking with a 1/1. The key with Martin is making sure that he stays alive in combat, and if he does have flying and double strike, that does make his chances of survival even better, and it is an onboard Crater Hoof. So just be aware that you'll be sort of enemy number 1 if Martin hits the battlefield, but he is the best combat buff enabler in the entire deck. Arvad the Cursed will give our legendary creatures we control +2/+2. Bayek of Siwa will give our legendary creatures double strike, and it has double strike itself, enabling that Odric as well. Aurelia the War Leader is here for extra combat, so that we can continue to get in with Terra twice to get more activations of her reanimation ability. Baldin Century Herdmaster is a 0/7, so thus his power is less than 3. During your turn, each creature assigns combat damage equal to its toughness rather than its power, and whenever he attacks, up to 100 target creatures each get +0/+X until end of turn, where X is the number of cards in your hand. So I look at this on average as a +4 or +5 to your creatures. He swings as a 7/7, and he buffs our whole board. Just all great things to see there. Goring Ceratops will give our creatures double strike as well, and itself has double strike with power 3 or less there. And then Havoc Eater is also a power 3 or less creature that will ETB goad up to 1 target creature for each of our opponents, and then it will become a massive flyer itself. Typically the X1 encounters I think would be about 12 1 encounters, so I look at this as a floor case of a 15/15 flyer, and of course this will only cost you 2 mana if it's reanimated off of Terra, while taking a lot of heat off of your back. So this is going to throw a lot of damage around the board. Now, how do we get these big beefy boys in the graveyard? Well, we're running a bunch of self-mill effects to discard them there. Banon the Returner's Leader is a recent creature from Final Fantasy that I believe comes in the precon. Once during each of your turns, you may cast a creature spell from on cards in your graveyard that were put there from anywhere other than the battlefield this turn, so it enables some card advantage when we discard. And then whenever you attack, you may pay 1 and discard a card. If you do, draw a card. And notably, Banon himself does not have to attack there. Cathartic Reunion is a little bit risky in that as an additional cost to cast a spell, we have to discard 2. So if this does get countered, then you have now discarded 2 cards and are unable to draw those 3 cards, which really sucks. But this is a great play to see on turn 2 because generally turn 1 is going to be for a tapped land if we draw it. Turn 2, we want to be discarding something into the graveyard to play Terra turn 3, or if we have a 1-mana protection spell, player turn 4 with that protection spell. And then turn 4, we are going to theoretically swing with Terra, reanimate something out of the graveyard. So we really value effects that will let us discard into our graveyard and draw cards on turn 2. So this is also known as rummaging. Chivalric Alliance is going to say whenever you attack with 2 or more creatures, draw a card, but then we can pay 2 and discard a card to create a token, which is nice. I really look at this as sort of we'll probably discard using its ability 1 or 2 times if we're not hitting our other discard outlets. But overall, this is going to be a great draw engine that can be a little bit more expensive to discard things into the graveyard. Then we have Dismissive Pyromancer, which will allow us to tap and pay 1 to rummage as well. And the nice thing about this is that it's a human and it can sacrifice itself if we absolutely need to deal 4 damage to a creature. Of course, this is going to be reanimated off of Terra, so we like creatures that sacrifice themselves. We also have Ripples of Undeath, which is going to allow us to mill 3 cards at the beginning of our turn, and then we can pay 1 and 3 life to draw a card from among those, which is pretty nice. This card is a little bit expensive, but it is just the best vegetable piece in any sort of self-mill deck because it will both mill you, combined with Terra. This will be milling 5 cards per turn, which is awesome. And then we can also just draw cards off of it as well, which we're happy to do. Then we have Thrilling Discovery, the same effect as Cathartic Reunion, but there's not the risk because it is not an additional cost to discard those cards. Brass's Tunnel Grinder will be one of the 2 extremely valuable early game effects where we discard our entire hand and then draw that many cards plus 1. So we basically just get to ditch our whole hand in the graveyard, draw a new set, enabling that will make our land drops in the mid game, which is awesome. And then this guy will actually transform after basically 3 turns of him being on the battlefield into a land that allows us to get free value when we cast spells with the mana from the artifact, or I'm sorry, the land there. So Brass's Tunnel Grinder, extremely good card here. Can't believe that this is only $1. Then we have Veronica Dissident Scribe, which is going to be an amazing synergy piece and really ties the whole deck together because it's a legend, it is a human, and it has power 3 or less. And whenever it attacks, we get to rummage, and then it will sort of draw us 2 cards because the junk token can then be sacrificed on a later turn to get us temporary card advantage if we happen to run out of gas. So Veronica Distant Scribe just going to be one of those pieces that ties the whole deck together while enabling us to never be dead in the water. Then we have Celis Rune Knight, which I'm uncertain of the TCG player pricing in this analysis because it says it's $50, but that seems extremely high to me, but maybe this will continue to just be priced way too high until a lot more of the precons can be printed and just get out in the wild. But Celis will allow us to basically do the exact same thing as Brass's Tunnel Grinder. We get to ditch our whole hand, draw a new hand, and then as if that wasn't already good enough as a 4/4 human, it will buff our whole team when things enter from our graveyard, and of course will work extremely well with Terra. Celis is in the precon, and she would make for a great secondary commander if you're tired of seeing Terra all the time, but Celis is just amazing. If this thing hits the battlefield, she does a tremendous amount of work by buffing our team with every creature that enters, and that's of course what this whole deck is built to do. All right, let's talk about some defense here. So we are running a lot of Edict effects in our removal category. Accursed Marauder forces each player to sacrifice a non-token creature, and of course we can sacrifice Accursed Marauder to put it right back in the graveyard to reanimate later if needed. Bounty Agent will destroy commanders, or overall just legendary permanents, but most of the time this is going to be held up for your opponent's commanders, and it will of course sacrifice itself to be reanimated later. Dauntless Dismantler will take care of artifacts and also slow down the treasure decks tremendously. Artifacts are always good to destroy, but if you're not concerned about artifacts, then you can certainly replace this with a different removal spell. Something like a Soul Shatter would also go really far in this deck. We do have a Fleshbag Marauder, which is power 3 or less. ETB, each player sacrifices a creature. We're going to sacrifice the Marauder. Intrepid Hero is a bit of a pet card. Also, I think if you were to look at other options like this, Royal Assassin would be a really interesting one. This is a Rattlesnake effect because we can tap it to destroy target creature with power 4 or greater. Now, what you could do, because this is a Rattlesnake effect on an activated ability, you can negotiate with your opponents at the table to say, you know, hey, scary opponent with tremendously scary commander at the table, I will be holding this up to destroy your thing all the time, except you get to keep it if you swing it elsewhere. Or you just sort of negotiate with like, hey, player A, I need to snipe player B, so if I do that, then will you grant me amnesty for the turn or something like that. So these are great negotiation pieces, really increasing the politicking of the table. And like I said, Royal Assassin is another pet card that just didn't quite make the cut in this particular list. Then we are running Lauren of the Third Path, ETB, destroy target artifact or enchantment, and then we get card advantage out of it later, just a classic staple in white decks. Eowyn, Fearless Knight, will ETB, exile target creature an opponent controls with greater power, and then it also synergizes with Terra by giving legendary creatures we control protection from each of that creature's colors until end of turn, which means that it cannot be damaged, blocked, or targeted by the specific thing that you're protecting from. So in this case, what it really means is that Terra can just get through almost guaranteed if we're against like a 2-color, monocolor, or often even 3-color decks. A lot of 3-color decks will make creatures of the same color. And then we have Legate Lanius, Caesar's Ace, which is another Edict effect, but it will actually leave us with at minimum a 5/5 on the battlefield, which is not too bad. Will of the Abzan, if Terra's on the battlefield, we get to both force our opponents to sacrifice a creature with the greatest power and lose 3 life, and also reanimate a creature from our graveyard onto the battlefield. Eomer, King of Rohan, is a legendary human noble with double strike itself on a 2/2, so it can be reanimated with Terra. It will become a big beefy boy, depending on how many humans we have, and then when ETB's target player, us, becomes the Monarch, which means we get to not only introduce the Monarch into the game, which is a fun twist, but allows us to draw that card at the end of our turn, and also gives us something to chase during the game. And the most important part of this card is actually the last bit, which is that it deals damage equal to its power to any target, basically saying that, look, this is just a big beefy boy that will come into play, destroy something, and then draw us a card, which is very cool indeed. We are running one mass disruption spell in the form of Taunt from the Rampart, but of course we are also running Living Death to force our opponents to sacrifice their creatures as well. Taunt from the Rampart is the very first card I add to any deck in Boros. This is almost a 5 mana I win the game button, or at least 5 mana cut half of my opponent's life totals in half, and also allows to get through for free combat damage because it not only turns out blockers, but it basically guarantees that we will not be attacked in combat for the next turn cycle, which is just great to see. You always want to be holding a card in your hand that will allow you to get to your next turn, and also coincidentally deals a ton of damage to the table. Speaking of Living Death, which I mentioned briefly, let's talk about our reanimation spells. We are running Reanimate, which is simply the most efficient reanimation spell in the format. Priest of Fell Rites can sack itself to reanimate something, so it itself can be reanimated later to continue to do that over and over. And then we have Alesha, who laughs at fate, which is going to be reanimating smaller things because she cares about mana value less than or equal to her power from a graveyard to the battlefield, and she will slowly get more buff. Now, this is good synergy with something like a Greyman of Ascent Stalwart, which provides that static buff, and we'll be able to reanimate more things. But generally, I think this is a once-a-turn reanimation for pretty much anything in our graveyard, minus the big expensive boys. We are running Victimize to return 2 cards from our graveyard to the battlefield tapped, which is pretty great, and also chucks a creature with an ETB or something that we want to reuse back into the graveyard to be reanimated later. Then we are running Sister Hospitaller, which is sort of like a free 3/2 body that can also grab any other creature out of the graveyard for us and allow us to gain life equal to its mana value. So if something like an Angel of the Glories rises in the battlefield, which can't be reanimated from Terra, you can just reanimate the sister, and then the sister will reanimate the angel, and then you get to gain all of that life as well. In our mass reanimation category is that living death that we've talked about. We also have Ascend from Avernus, which is going to be X and 3 white to return all creatures with mana value X or less from your graveyard to the battlefield, and it gets exiled. And then we have that Angel of Glory's Rise that I talked about earlier. As a one-off in its category, we have Roaming Throne, which is going to double all of our human triggers. Now, it cannot be reanimated by Terra, but this is simply too much value to not play in the deck. I was also looking at, if you wanted to look at a more budget ad, if you already have the Terra Precon, you can run Go-Go in place of Roaming Throne, which will be another way to actually make Go-Go into a copy of Terra, and then those will attack in combat and allow you to get more of those Terra triggers. And because Go-Go is renamed, it does not die to the legendary rule, which is a great thing to see. In red, we have our sort of first non-legendary clone card there with Go-Go. We'll touch on some of our other one-offs in their category here. Douthie Voidwalker is perfect synergy in this deck because it's going to not only hate on graveyards as it sits out on the battlefield, it's going to be free mana and card advantage with that second activated ability. And the best part about Douthie Voidwalker is that it sacrifices itself, which means that we can then reanimate it on a later turn to almost permanently lock out cards hitting our opponent's graveyards, which is absolutely brutal. Then we'll touch on some of our non-creature finishers here. Shared Animosity is going to buff our humans a ton whenever they attack. Akroma's Will is going to serve multiple roles here. It's going to not only give our team Flying Vigilance and Double Strike, enabling more Terra triggers, but it will also give them Lifelink, Indestructible, and Protection, which means that it protects against all destroy effects and any sort of like damage dealy, board wipey effects like Blasphemous Act. And then finally, we have Banner of Kinship, which is just one of the best overruns stapled onto a permanent, recently released in Bloomburrow. This will enter with a fellowship counter on it for each creature you control of the chosen type, which we will choose humans, and then creatures we control of the chosen type get +1/+1 for each fellowship counter. But when we're not overrunning the board, we want to be protecting Terra with Jarina, Dauntless General. She will ETB exile target player's graveyard, so just including more grave hate there. When we sacrifice her, humans we control gain hexproof and indestructible, so this will not protect against your Cyclonic Rifts or Farewells or any sort of exile board wipes, but this is going to be just a great on-board shield for Terra that can also be reanimated, so we're not afraid to use that sacrifice ability. Shelter is just a quick cantrippy type of protection piece that will also allow Terra to get through because, again, protection means that she can attack and not be blocked by the color of our choice until end of turn, so we can use it both offensively and defensively, which is why I included Shelter. You could replace this with a Galadriel's Dismissal to also sort of force your opponent's creatures to phase out if they're attacking you for a little bit more flexibility there, but Galadriel's Dismissal costs a little bit more money and does not replace itself, so I'm running Shelter in its place instead. Then we have Guardian of Faith, which will ETB and allow any number of target creatures except for itself phase out, which is nice because if we get a couple of Terra triggers, we can resolve the first one, reanimate a big boy onto the battlefield, and then second we can reanimate a Guardian of Faith to then phase out those creatures, ensure they survive until it is our next turn. That will of course leave us somewhat defenseless, but it can be to your discretion which creatures you leave phased in to block and things like that. And then we are also running Vexilus Praetor. Again, commanders you control have protection from everything. Just a very powerful wording there, means it can't be targeted, dealt damage by, or blocked by anything. So that's pretty amazing in itself. This card is a little bit expensive because it's from the Warhammer 40k. I believe it's from one of the precons, so there's not too many of this card on the market at the moment, but this does make for a good protection piece to have on the battlefield as well. Let's talk about drawing some cards. We are running Esper Sentinel, which is I believe the second most or third most expensive card in the deck, but it does so much because we are going to be boosting power. It is a human itself, and those are the two primary things that we care about, along with being able to be reanimated by Terra if it is targeted. So this will be drawing us a lot of cards. Weathered Wayfarer can help us grab so many lands. I cannot tell you how valuable it is to have a Weathered Wayfarer on the battlefield for only 1 mana. It can tutor up any of of our lands, which is pretty awesome. And someone will have to double check whether you can search up MDFCs with this card. I think you can, because I think technically an MDFC is still a land, like it's got both a creature type and a land type if the front side is a creature. So I think you can grab MDFCs off of this, but somebody double check me on that in the comments. We're running Braids, which can be reanimated by Terra with power 3 or less. This will allow us to sacrifice creatures to put them back into the graveyard, and often Braid is going to be a draw 3 cards a turn because your opponent simply will not sacrifice the thing. I would say most often they will sacrifice a creature if they're running like tokens or something, but if you have artifacts to sack, or maybe even a land if you are that type of guy, then they will certainly not do that and allow you to draw a bunch of cards. Lock Treasure Hunter comes in the Terra Precon. It can't be blocked by creatures with power, greater power, and whenever it attacks, each player mills, and it will create us a treasure token if a land card was milled, and until end of turn, we can cast a spell from among those cards. So it basically draws us a card as well. I'm not sure why this guy is so expensive. Again, I think it's because there's just not a lot of Final Fantasy Precon supply on the market as I record this on May 29th. Morbid Opportunist will draw us a bunch of cards. Again, like I mentioned, we are running a lot of Edict effects and a lot of removal, and Morbid Opportunist will just sort of naturally draw a bunch of cards on our opponent's turns because creatures die in combat all the time. So this is just a great card draw engine and can be reanimated by Terra. Mengar the Diplomat, the most important piece of text here is whenever an opponent casts their second spell each turn, draw a card, and it is a 2/4, can be reanimated by Terra, and it does have lifelink with giving us that Odric synergy. Nelly Borka has a lot of text, so let's just read this card. It's a 2/4 with Vigilance for 4 mana. Whenever she attacks suspect target creature, then goad all suspected creatures. And a suspected creature has menace and can't block. And what isn't said in this reminder text is that the creature remains suspected. And then whenever one or more creatures an opponent controls deals combat damage to one or more of your opponents, you and the controller of those creatures each draw a card. So it will naturally pay itself off for goading more and more creatures as it remains on the battlefield. This thing is an absolute powerhouse, but it has to stay on the battlefield in order to continually goad those suspected creatures, and it will just naturally draw us cards as well. And it's also, of course, a legendary human, so just a ton of synergy packed into Nelly Borka here. Capping off our non-lands, we will ironically talk about our ramp pieces last. We are running a Soul Ring just because a Generous Plunderer can make us treasure tokens and give us some political bargaining power to create tapped treasure tokens for our opponents, and incidentally hates on artifact decks, which is always a good thing to be doing in Commander. Knight of the White Orchid will ramp us for some durable lands and can search up any plains cards, including Surveil lands, which is really nice. Then we have Lotho, Corrupt Sheriff, which is going to be a 2-mana big treasure maker. This thing activates pretty much on every player's turn, so he's going to be making a ton of treasures for us, and it's just an insane piece here. It isn't a human, but it is a legendary and does get buffed off of Arvad. Milliken is in the deck to just instantly mill us while being a mana dork, which we always appreciate. Then we have Sand Scout. Sand Scout is tremendous because it can allow us to search up Arid Archway, which will actually bounce a land back to our hand. So the way that Sand Scout actually works in practice is that once it DTBs, you'll search up that Arid Archway, bounce a land back to your hand as it enters tapped. So now we've ramped for a mana, and we've actually also drawn a card at the same time. Granted, the Arid Archway mana is colorless, but it gives us both mana advantage and a card advantage. And then it will incidentally create us 1/1 red, green, and white Sand Warrior creature tokens whenever one of our lands are put into our graveyard from anywhere. So just a lot going on here with Sand Scout. So much synergy with this guy. And then also I will just mention as well with Sand Scout, we have one backup desert in case we draw our Arid Archway in the form of Conduit Pylons, which will ETB Surveil 1, which allows us to put another card in the graveyard. And then finally in our ramp category, we just have a regular old 2-mana mana dork. It's a 3/1 with Sunset Strike Master, taps to add a red, and importantly, it can pay 3, tap, and sack itself to deal 6 damage to target creature with flying. If if we need to hate on a particularly scary flyer, if we're facing like a dragon's deck or something. And those are the non-lands. I'll take a quick spin through the mana base and then we'll wrap up this video. For our lands, this mana base is optimized for pip production, but on a minor budget. So we are not running all of the fetch lands. We're running one fetch land, which we'll talk about in just a second. But Ancient Ziggurat, of course, we're running 49 creatures in the deck. Now, this can't be used to activate Terra's abilities, so keep that in mind, but it's a great way to produce Mardu for your creatures and actually get Terra onto the battlefield. Arid Archer, we already talked about. Battlefield Forge is a budget duel. Bloodstained Mire is our one fetch land because it is the most affordable out of all three of the Mardu fetch lands. Boggart Trawler for some incidental grave hate and can be reanimated with Terra, and it is an untapped land on the backside if we pay the 3 life. Boros Garrison, also the neat thing about bounce lands is that on turn 2, if we play the Boros Garrison without playing a card from our hand, then we can actually get a discard because we have to discard down to 7. So we're running 2 bounce lands in total in order to potentially trigger this as a replacement for a turn 2 play. At least we can discard a card into our graveyard. Caves of Koilos is a budget duel. Clifftop Retreat for a budget duel. Command Tower budget, everything. Condo Ponds we talked about. Desolate Mire budget duel. Dragon Skull Summit budget duel. Elegant Parlor is a survey land. Quite expensive. You could just replace this with a basic and be fine, but the fact that it is searchable by our various things that search up either planes or the fetch land as well, then that does make this more valuable. So I think it's worth it to pay the cost, in my personal opinion, but this is ETB Surveil 1. Exotic Orchard for budget Mardu. Fabled Passage for budget, actually, well, I believe we're leaving out a swamp here, so I think this is budget duel for red and white. Fetid Heath, budget duel. Graven Cairns, budget duel. Haunted Ridge, budget duel. Horizon of Progress is actually really affordable, only $2 to basically get Mardu colors, and it also can sack itself to draw a card and ramp us. So just a lot going on there with Horizon of Progress. Isolated Chapel, budget duel. Malakir Rebirth for protection. We are running a mountain. Orzhov Basilicus, another bounce land. Path of Ancestry to get all of the scry triggers because we are human tribal. Running a plains. Plaza of Heroes, again, only about $6 here for the mana necessary to cast Terra, which is pretty awesome. Raucous Theater as a surveil land. Reflecting Pool for budget Mardu. Rugged Prairie for budget duel. Sigiri Shelter for protection. Shattered Sanctum for, well, just making that mana again with Orzhov mana there. Sulphurous Springs, Rakdos budget duel. Sundering Eruption for that last line. Creatures without flying can't block this turn, which is tremendous. And it is an untapped land there on the back if we pay the 3 life. Sundown Pass for budget duel. Sunscorched Divide for budget duel. Takanuma for some emergency mill. And of course, we are running a decent amount of legends in this deck, so there's a good chance that this could actually only be channeled for around 2 mana. And then we are running a Witch Enchanter that can be reanimated with Terra, and will be some emergency destroy target artifact or enchantment on a human body. And that will conclude my Terra Herald of Hope optimized deck tech. Of course, if you guys have any suggestions, leave them down in the comments for cards that I might have missed. I know I have a giant laundry list of cards that just didn't quite make the cut that I'll be sharing in the comments as well. And of course, as usual, if you enjoyed this video, leave a like and subscribe. And if you want to support me and my channel, you can check out my Patreon linked down below. And then one last reminder, I will have that gold fishing companion video coming out, so where you can actually see how this deck will perform and function in a playtesting environment. I typically do a couple of games. The first game low interaction, second game high interaction, to show that if Terra is removed, how does the deck perform in that case as well. But that is the end of the video, guys. Thank you all for watching once again, and hopefully you'll see you all in the next one.